one great way to add more detail to your set is doing a stencil. Now it may sound really complicated, but it's really not. It's really quite simple. It just takes a few steps, and there's a few different ways to do it. So I'm going to show you 2 different examples of how to do a stencil that'll give you some different ranges of things you can do with it. Now you're like, well, how do I figure out what a stencil is? Well, there's a lot of great research books online that they can show you stencils. Some of the books I really like are these books from Dover that are all about stencils. There's a lot of them. And you can go through, and these are all stencils from different periods, from different styles, and you can take them and use them to create your own pattern. If you want to, commercial made stencils are just fine. This is not rocket science. You don't have to make your own. But what I find is I can't find the commercial ones that do all the things I want them to do, so I want to make my own. But you can use a commercial made stencil to make your own stencil. So what you're going to need is poster board. I usually use just white poster board. You don't want the cheapest poster board out there, but you don't have to have the most expensive. In fact, if it gets too thick, it gets hard to cut. So you want something that's kind of in between. But mostly the stuff from Walmart or places like that is just fine. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to transfer your pattern on. So that's what I've done on this one. I've transferred my pattern on. And I usually will do like a base pattern and then use that to create my finished pattern. This is actually half of a pattern, and I'll show you what the full thing looks like in a minute. But then I'll transfer that on. So once you get your pattern transferred, what I like to do is cover it with clear packing tape. Something else you could use is clear contact paper, but because contact paper is a large sheet, it's much harder to get a flat surface, and really you want as flat as possible. But with packing tape, you can do it in sections, and you can get it pretty flat. So this whole section is done. Now you want to do that before you're cutting it. So you want it covered with your packing tape before you cover it. So this will strengthen your poster board and give you some resistance to if any paint gets on it. Because a lot of times I'll use this to spray through. I don't necessarily, or I've probably ever done a true stencil. And that's where you use kind of a flat brush and kind of pounce on the color. That's the traditional way, but it's really time consuming. It's really hard on your wrists, and you'll find you're worn out in about an hour. So I do most of mine, I either use the stencil as basically a pattern, or I spray through it with spray paint. And that's what I'm going to show you. So once you get it covered, and we're going to sit down for that. So once you get it covered with your clear packing tape, take an X-Acto knife with a very sharp tip. Make sure you have a bunch of tips ready because this kind of goes through tips. And you very carefully cut out each and every piece. Now you're saying, wow, that's a lot of work. If you're doing a set, let's say that's 16 feet tall, and it takes you an hour to cut this out, it would take you many days to paint it. So though it seems like it's a long process, in the long run, it's going to be beneficial. So you just cut out all your pieces. And as you probably know with a stencil, make sure that you leave lots of connection points to keep it solid and strong. You don't want to have too many things flopping or unconnected. So you try to find places to connect things that look natural or make sense. For instance, like this stem of this leaf, you can put in connection points, because if I didn't do that, that'd leave a big area to flop around. So I cut this completely out, and this is the final template for the stencil for a show called Doll's House 2. And where I got the idea for this is the show was set in Norway. So I went back and looked at folk art from Norway and found different motifs and different looks that they used, and they did use a lot of stencil. And so I created a stencil that used those kind of of motifs and shapes in it. So when you're doing a show, make sure you look at the period you're doing, because stenciling has been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. So you can find examples of stenciling for many, many periods, many, many styles. You can find books, wallpaper. So there's a lot of ways to find out, but look at what your show needs as far as style. And here's what an actual panel from the show looks like. This was done with spray paint, with silver spray paint. Often I'll mist the back of the stencil with a spray glue, so it really stays down, but not so much that it sticks, just enough to make it tacky to create a nice, clean look. And this is what it looked like on the full set. So that's what the full set looked like. So you can see where doing this work in the short term was probably a little time consuming, but in the long term it saved me a lot of time creating these wall panels. And all the panels are actually separate pieces, so I could work on the panels while the set was building the rest of the mechanics for the show. So that's one way to do stencils, probably the most traditional way to do stencils. Another way is to simply use lace or fabric that's got holes in it enough to create a pattern. So this is just a really simple pattern. What I like to do is spray the back of it with spray adhesive. Not a huge amount, but you know, enough to keep it stuck down. And it does want to stick to itself, so you know, that's just part of the deal. So you stick that down and make sure it's kind of laid out flat, that you're not stretching it. No bubbles, no wrinkles, that it's really kind of attached well. And then you'll take your spray paint, any color, it doesn't matter, whatever will work for you, and just mist it. Now you don't want to saturate it. You don't want to use a huge amount. What you want to do is build it up. Because if you do it too much, it'll start really seeping underneath the lace. And I see a place where I didn't stick it down well, and that's probably not going to have as nice a stencil to it. But you spray it down, and then you just take it up, and you can create a really nice wallpaper. You can reuse the lace a number of times. Eventually it will get saturated and it will get stopped up and it won't make as nice a transfer, but you can use quite a bit of it. And you can get it lace in pretty big amounts, so you can do pretty large amount of walls. So that's a pretty easy, simple way to do. This also works on windows and on plexiglass. So if you want kind of a etched etched window kind of feel, you can use lace for that as well. Now the last way that I do is create my own stencil. And what you'll need for that is you need the pattern, and this is a pattern for, I'm not sure what for, but for some show. As you can see, it's all put together in pieces. So what I did is I created the pattern and then Xeroxed it, copied it, and then taped it together to create a whole big pattern. So I didn't have to draw all the different little patterns, I could just tape them together. And then I would take this and I would put it down on a table. And I usually do this, you can do this straight on a table, but if you have any foam, I found that really good because then you can use some of these push pins to help you tack things down. So the first thing you're going to do is put down your pattern, make sure it's taped down really well and really flat. Over top of the pattern, you're going to put plastic. Painter's plastic is just fine. It doesn't need to be terribly thick, but you want a really smooth, taut plastic over top. And then you add your screening. Now this is just charcoal screening from Home Depot or Lowe's. Fairly inexpensive. You can get it in rolls in different widths. You can even get this 8 feet wide. So you can do pretty wide, big things with it. And then you put that over top. And then use your push pins or tape or clips or however you want to keep it down. You can put it back, you can put it down. One thing to keep in mind is this can't move until it's dry. So if you have it someplace, you have to make sure you can leave it there until it's dry. If you move this when it's wet, you've just destroyed your entire pattern. You can use, I often will use old glue containers to do this. You can also use the condiment containers, the kind you put ketchup and mustard and things in. That works really well to do this as well. But I think these work really well, and it gives you something to seal your glue back up with, so that works really well. So I just mixed some food coloring into it because your glue is a water base. You can use a water-based food coloring. Don't ever put food coloring into an oil base. You'll be sorry. Oil and water actually don't mix. So I'll mix this up, and if I like doing a large piece, I'll do a bigger bucket of it, and then use a funnel and put it in. So what you want to do is you want to I usually like to outline first, and you kind of are almost scrubbing it into the fibers of the screen. You want it to really adhere into the fibers of the screen. Now because you're dealing with a liquid glue, it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to get really, really fine pointed lines, but you can get pretty close. If you want really fine detail, then you should probably go with the poster board version. But what this does for you is you can create really, really large scale patterns. And I would just continue doing this, filling in all of my detail all over the whole thing until it dries. And what it looks like when it's done is this. This is a stencil I did for Shakespeare in Love. And all the places you see blue are the glue. And the screening is where you're going to be spraying through. Because the screening is fairly wide, you can spray through it and you're not really going to see that grid shape. But that's what it looks like dry. It holds up fairly well. This one was sprayed. And this I did do on foam, so that's where you see all these marks are where I use push pins to hold it down really, really flat. I actually did this on fabric, so you can do this on fabric as well. But you can also do it on paper, you can do it on the wall itself, you can do it on pretty much any surface you want to. And what it looks like, this is what it looked like when I was actually doing it for the production of Cabaret. And as you see, that's how long the stencil was. I think it ended up being 12 feet long. As you see in this one, I used kind of a purpley blue color, and then it kind of changed. Because I wasn't concerned with what color the glue was. I wasn't concerned about keeping it uniform. I just wanted a color. So then when this is done, I could use this as a stencil to stencil onto the walls. In this case, I actually stenciled it onto paper, and then used the paper just like wallpaper and put it up on the set. And sprayed through it the same way, pinning it down, making sure it was nice and taut, and spraying right through it. So this way you can create your own custom wallpaper for the show. So you can use that. That's a great way to do a stencil. And as I said before, a lot of times I use the stencil more as a pattern. So this is a show called The Underpants, and I basically traced out the pattern and then painted it in. You could do this the traditional stencil method of pouncing but this would have taken forever. It took long enough, as in this case, because the entire set was covered in stencils. So you can use things in any way that works for you. Don't feel like you're trapped into using something in a certain way because somebody said that's the only way. Don't believe them. Try it. They might be right, but odds are they're probably wrong. So try it and make it work for you. Try any of the techniques I've shown you and try them together, try them in unison. Just play. It's all about imagination and fun, and if you're having fun, you're doing theater, and that's what theater's about. So enjoy yourself, have some fun, do some projects, and I'd love to talk to you. Bye-bye.